Alright guys, welcome to our review. We are looking at period 4.1. Period 4.1 covers the years 1800 to 1848. And kind of specifically, we're looking at kind of the political climate of those years. Now, to start off with, I'm going to start with the J here. So our first J is the first J of JMaMo. And he is elected in 1800, and that would be our boy Jefferson is elected. Jefferson is elected in 1800. And guys, if we're being completely honest, what happens during his presidency is not a whole lot. In 1803, he has one really big thing that, quite frankly, expanded the power of the federal government, which was not typically his move, something he was usually against, but alas, it was too good of a deal for him to pass up. And that is the Louisiana Purchase. Now, a few things about this purchase is that it doubled the size of the U.S. It was about 0.03 cents per acre. Not 0.03 cents, sorry. It was 3 cents an acre. That's silly. People who explored it were Lewis and Clark, and we purchased it for $15 million from France. The other thing that he's involved in is this is Miss Puckett's best attempt at this. I'm aware that it's not a great attempt, but like we're doing the best we can. Of all the things and stuff, this right here are boxes. Look, it's shipments. Because something he passes is the Embargo Act. Now, it should be noted that the Embargo Act was to stop all trade. And if you guys will remember, it made the economy plummet. The economy was not in a good space after this. The economy was not in a good place. Which is why later he passes the Non-Intercourse Act, and he's like, okay, fine. And the reason he passes the Embargo Act is really because Britain and France keep like capturing our ships and messing with our sailors, so he's like, fine, you know what? You guys can't play nice, we're just going to take everything, and you can't trade with that. We're not going to trade with anybody. We can rely on ourselves. And it turns out to be a disaster because we do need people. And essentially, it's really unpopular. So then he passes the Non-Intercourse Act, which essentially says that we just won't trade with Britain and France. We'll trade with everybody else. It's still a little bit too little too late. Still, though, he can still get his good friend elected in the next election, which is James Madison. James Madison is elected in 1808. But his presidency is marked by Mr. Madison's War. Mr. Madison's War. Now, Mr. Madison's War is the War of 1812. Now, the War of 1812, when you think of the War of 1812, I want you to think of boats. Because it's primarily a battle that is, or a war that is fought like at sea. It's over the impressment of sailors. Was the impressment of American sailors. Meaning, we captured sailors and, the British captured American sailors and forced them into the British military. So essentially we go to war over that. Now, the outcomes of the war is kind of humdrum. Some people call it the second, War of Independence, because we still win. But essentially, it's kind of a dud war, because there's no land that changes. However, there are a few big outcomes. Number one, we see an increase and patriotism. National pride is at an all-time high. We see Jackson arise as a hero of the Battle of New Orleans. Jackson is a hero, becomes a military hero, and because of our inability to trade with Britain, we become more self-reliant and industrial. And kind of the last big thing that comes out of it is because some people are mad, specifically the Federalists are mad, that we're at war with Britain. Because essentially the war hawks wanted to go to war. They wanted to go to war. And there were some people who didn't want to go to war. And those people who didn't want to go to war were usually Federalists. And they held a meeting in Connecticut called the Hartford Convention, where they think, oh, hey, what we're going to do, Federalists want to secede. And they have this idea that they're going to put Aaron Burr in charge, and Aaron Burr is like, what? I'm finally getting tapped? People like me. They really like me? And essentially, people find out about this, and they're seen as traitors. And essentially that marks the end of the Federalist Party, because everyone's like, oh, the Federalists are traitors who want nothing to do with America. Yikes. So, now we're on Mo. So when James Monroe comes into power, we essentially don't have Federalists anymore, so we just have Democratic Republicans who are eventually going to split. In this period, because there's less political fighting, we call it the era of good feelings. We call it the era of good feelings. Now, this period has like the most stuff that happens in it. This period has the most stuff that happens in it. First of all, we have, I'm going to draw some symbols to kind of, I want you to think about like what you think this is. What would I be talking about? This would be the American system, which was the infrastructure deal by Henry Clay. Then the other thing we have is, during this time period, is the and guys, I know this is a terrible rendition of, I don't even have a picture of it in front of me, but let's let's try in here. We have this, which is Florida. Some of you are like, a weapon. Nah, it's Florida. During his presidency, essentially, during Monroe's presidency, Jackson was chasing some Seminoles, and he chases them down to Spanish Florida, captures a couple of Spanish forts, and then writes to the White House and says, hey guys, just so you guys know, if you want to, we could probably do a treaty with them, because I got some forts down here. And essentially, the reason we have Florida at this time. Now, another thing is that we're going through a tough time because Missouri wants to enter as a free state. Missouri wants to enter as a free state, and we have this whole wants to enter as a slave state. But the problem is that we have, if we add another slave state, that means that there's going to be more slave states than free states. And that's going to cause issues for some people. And so the big thing that we have to do is we're going to try to maintain the balance in Congress. That's kind of the big kind of onus that's up to us here. is to maintain the balance in Congress. And essentially what they do is they say Missouri is going to come in as a slave state. Maine, up here, is going to come in as a free state. And then we're going to maintain the balance. And after this, everywhere above the 3630 parallel line is going to be free. Everything below it will be slave. And then lastly, the last big thing we're going to have is something I call the Monroe Doctrine. And essentially, this is a sign we held up to the rest of the world. This is the Monroe Doctrine. I call it the Monroe Doctrine. Because it was a signal to the rest of the world that the U.S. is closed, that the Western Hemisphere is closed to further colonization. So this is the globe. We have things like, oh, look at the U.S. up here and things and stuff. And we have done all other stuff, and then more stuff over here, and then, I don't know. Guys, the world's hard. Yeah, we're just living. And essentially what it was is we said the Western Hemisphere is closed to further European colonization. We didn't want other countries coming over to where we were and where South America was and trying to like settle and colonize new areas. We said we are close to that now. We're done with that. Absolutely not anymore. Now, one more thing to think about during these times is we also have some court cases that are pretty big. The first one is Marbury the Madison. I'm sure some of you are like, Miss Puckett, what are you thinking? Show us what you're doing. Okay, so the first case is Marbury versus Madison. Now guys, this case, it essentially established, it's the whole reason that every other case can happen. Because essentially it establishes that the Supreme Court's job is to declare the constitutionality of laws, called judicial review. Their job is to declare the constitutionality of laws. Now, the second case we're going to look at is McCulloch versus Maryland. McCulloch v. Maryland. Money, money, money. This has to do with taxation. And specifically, there is a national bank and it was the idea that Maryland tried to tax the National Bank, which is federal, and they are not allowed to do it. The federal power is asserted over state power. And then finally, in Gibbons v. Ogden, go! This was the one that has to do with the canal, like the boat things, the boat licenses. And this is an oversimplification, but guys, who has more power? A federal license, we determine. It's more powerful than state. And so that right there is the court cases. So that is part 1. Now part 2 we're going to jump into in a minute, and that is going to be over the age of Jackson specifically.